Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us once again for this, the 10th, I believe, in our P2 webinar series. And today we'll be looking at something that I find really fascinating. We're calling it the journey to continuous testing and release on demand, which is something that's very topical today. For those who've not joined us before, we'll be talking for about half an hour on this topic. It's quite a tight timescale, so we won't be able to take questions, I'm afraid, but do please write them in, as we always do answer them. We will come back via email afterwards with answers to those questions. And of course, we'll be sharing the recording of the webinar to you all. So please do feel free to share that with your friends or pass it on as and when you feel appropriate. Before we crack on with the webinar, for those who've not come across P2 Consulting before, allow me to spend a few minutes just briefly introducing you to us. P2 Consulting is, of course, the digital transformation house we set up 7 years ago to provide a real alternative to the big four. You'll know us as a trusted consulting support to some of the biggest names in retail, finance, and the government, focusing on all stages of the delivery life cycle. We deliver our 12 services across a range of our free promises, as you can see on the next slide. And those promises are to control, to deliver, and of course, to improve on our clients' transformation ambitions. Today, we're going to be diving deep into a very specific service, the service of test management, which is something we do for a range of large clients. And I'm joined today to do that by the owner of that service, Jason Taylor. Just to very quickly introduce myself before I introduce Jason. I'm Adam Skinner. I'm the P2 Consulting's Director of Consulting. And Jason, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Adam. So my name is Jason Taylor. I'm a managing consultant at P2 and head of testing. So it's my responsibility to manage and deliver testing and quality assurance services. And yeah, today I'm going to walk through a journey to continuous testing.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Jason. So let's crack on. So testing. What's so interesting about testing? Why is it such a challenging space? On the next slide, you'll see the classic waterfall staged approach that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. If you wouldn't mind jumping to the next slide. Now, on this slide, you'll see the classic waterfall delivery approach. Now, traditionally, testing would sit in a nice little niche between develop and deploy. And when you ask what's wrong with that, actually nothing. When you look at a simple flow like this, it seems like a very logical place. Of course, you need to test what you've developed, but there's some really interesting challenges around that. Firstly, what it tends to drive is a world where you test in bulk. So actually you do all your development, then you do a mass chunk of testing, which drives up the complexity of that testing activity massively, and of course the cost. More interestingly, you then have a massive traceability problem, because of course you have a very knotted and complex and integrated mass of code to test. So when stuff inevitably goes wrong, it can be quite hard to unpick where the actual fault is. And of course, the third major challenge of this is probably, for me, the most interesting. It's a challenge around what I call the gap between the knowledge and the testing. And what that essentially means is the development activity could have happened weeks, probably more like months, maybe even years on particularly large programs before the full-scale testing occurs. You then have a massive gap between the knowledge developed through that development activity and the testing. And in worst case scenarios, you could have had that knowledge actually leave the business by then. So if you have a huge gap between the development and the testing, you have this huge knowledge gap that often makes it incredibly hard to remember and to work out what's gone wrong, why you built stuff in the way you did in the first place, and so on. And that's why we talk in the world of testing these days about shift left and shift right. Shift left is trying to pull testing earlier in the development cycle, as early as you can through the design and development phase. And shift right is, of course, pushing testing forward to close to the release as well. In other words, trying to do testing throughout the entire life cycle of your development. And at that point, let me head across to Jason, who is the real expert of this. We'll just talk in a bit more detail about how we do this, why we do this, and what it looks like. Jason, over to you.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so yeah, Adam's obviously just taking you through what is a classic waterfall model. I'm going to just go over some of those points again. As you can see, it's linear, starting from requirements analysis, moving through design, development, testing, deploy, and maintain. So look, each phase is delivered in order and is governed by entry and exit criteria. And each phase contains specialist resources, which can limit the daily collaboration because of those phase boundaries. Adam's already explained. So look, here's the testing box, and generally this is where we test. All testing is executed here and all phases of testing. And we've already talked about some of the issues. So testing can be viewed as late in the delivery life cycle, effectively making testing a quality control rather than a quality assurance activity. As testing sits towards the end of the delivery life cycle, that may mean there is little time to fix defects, and most definitely those defects will be more costly to fix. Deployment can be delayed, and that adds more to your project costs. And finally, as most testers on the call will be aware, waterfall is a linear activity, and if there have been any project impacts earlier in the life cycle, then testing is generally the phase that is squeezed towards the end. So there are methods in the waterfall model that can be implemented to try and mitigate these, and Adam's just talked about, and I'm just going to talk again about shift left and shift right. So in the first instance, as I say, we call this shift left. This takes the view that testing is everywhere, and testing early will save time and cost. For example, fully testing requirements for issues such as ambiguity and completeness ensures those requirements are both testable and developable, avoiding defects and possible change requests later in the delivery lifecycle. We can also consider shift right to ensure test asset reuse once an application is deployed. For example, execution of proactive performance testing and creation of automated regression packs can be used to predict possible production performance issues and support production defect fixes. So moving on, we're now going to look at the classic Agile Scrum approach. And as you can see here, this is iterative and it's made up of sprints, which are usually delivered in 2 to 3 week periods. Each sprint is delivered as in a collaborative manner that spans resources where all, as part of a Scrum team, deliver each iteration towards a minimum viable product that may be or may not be released. So where does testing support Agile apart from in the testing phase? So look, you can see here, automation is a key testing deliverable of Agile. And in this model, automation is used to support delivery. A deliverable of this in the first sprint is automation of that first sprint. In the second sprint, we automate sprint 2, and we use the automated sprint 1 test cases to support the sprint 2 delivery. And then in the third sprint, we automate sprint 3 testing and use automated sprint 1 and 2 test cases to support sprint 3 delivery. And finally, we deliver automated regression test packs for use after deployment. This means quality is delivered throughout the life cycle of an application from idea to decommission. We don't talk about shift left or shift right in the SAFe model or the scaled Agile model. We talk about built-in quality that you can see at the bottom. So if we understand that built-in quality supports the full application lifecycle and automation helps us to realize that potential, how do we get there? We must first consider the role of testing and quality assurance. Testing in any methodology is a risk assessment that supports the decision-making processes in an organization. For example, if defects are high, then the risk of release into a production environment may be higher than those with low defect rates. Notwithstanding, this may be affected by the types of defects, their severity and priorities. So what do we need to consider first, and what are the benefits of consistency, reusability and measurability? These three dimensions are definitely, I see these three dimensions as definitely methodology agnostic. And we can see here, quality assurance supported by testing best practice provides decision-making leadership. So the first dimension, we deliver test and quality assurance consistently. This is supported, as you can see here, by test policies, which set the testing principles that are expected across test delivery. For example, this may be as simple as where a test case exists, it must be written. Test processes. How do we deliver testing? How is this testing engaged? And how does testing align with the methodology selected? And then finally, testing standards. What is our best practice and what standards will testing follow? In the second dimension, we talk about driving reusability. We select test tools that support test asset reusability, such as test repositories and automation tools. We identify automation test candidates that will deliver quantifiable benefits and use this reusability to support built-in quality. Again, shift left, shift right. And then finally, the third dimension, in the third dimension, we measure. With the right tools in place, we can measure both testing and quality. These measurements can support delivery, for example, test burn down, quality, for example, test defect counts, and finally, the decision-making processes or the go, no-go processes. These three dimensions may give the appearance of a hierarchical construct, delivering a rigidity that may not support safe practices, but SAFe has an explanation for this. Firstly, we start with customer centricity and the network that created supports agility. We place the customer and their requirements at the center of our network, and this is generally how organizations begin. Organizations then overlay a hierarchy that is often seen to throttle agility through implementation of rigid standards and processes, which also puts resources into specific roles, limiting cross-phase collaboration. SAFe, or Scaled Agile, describes a dual operating system that allows for testing best practice, quality assurance, policies, processes, standards, tools and automation at the service level, while supporting agility by providing testing resources, tools and automation that can align to the selected SAFe methodology. This ensures that agility is retained while test delivery is governed by the three dimensions of consistency, reusability, and measurability. So, the move to automation. How do we move towards automation? We must start by selecting the right tools and suppliers. Our clients benefit by selecting those right tools. So what are the testing tools we should consider? So we look at test repositories to support consistent, reusable and measurable test assets. And from here also, we select and report on our metrics to provide that informed decision making. We use automation tools to reduce cost, time and improve quality. We employ frameworks to simplify that automation. And then finally, we look at things like service virtualization to replace stubs and harnesses. So we'll start by looking at test repositories. The test repository is not just a tool to store test cases. If used properly, it should be viewed as our testing book of records. It also ensures reusability. So why our book of records? Well, requirements can be stored and linked to test cases for traceability. Test cases are created and executed in the repository, ensuring full auditability. So who created the test case, who executed the test case, how many times has it been executed, how many times has it passed or failed, amongst other areas of reporting. Defects can be linked to test cases, ensuring traceability from defect to requirement. And finally, all test-related information is contained in the repository, which supports testing metrics and reporting. Looking at automation, automated test cases drive reusability. Once created, automated test cases are used to support at a project level for regression testing and production fixes, again going back to built-in quality. And automation, by definition, reduces costs by replacing manual testing resources with automated scripts, reduces time as it can be scheduled and run 24/7. It increases quality by delivering higher test coverage. Test cases can be run in multiple iterations rather than as a singular test. Greater coverage can reduce risk and improve quality. Automated test cases can also be stored in the selected test repository to promote reuse. Automation frameworks. Rather than using an automated test tool, we employ test frameworks to simplify the automation process and to ensure automation is available to resources other than those that are specialists. Please check out our P2 testing page on the P2 website for an insight piece that describes automation frameworks in more detail. But for this webinar, automation frameworks ensure that all testers can create and execute automated tests once they understand syntax and framework uses. And by that, I mean manual testers, not just automation specialists. And it also ensures the maintenance of automation is not required at the script level, which could lead to up to 200 script changes, but the framework level, which may require one change to an automation function library. Finally, service virtualization. This is an area I find very exciting as a tester. Most applications today are very complex and providing a full production level environment with all the integration required to deliver end-to-end testing may not be possible. And if it is, it can be very expensive. Service virtualization uses a similar approach as test case automation, where those integrations and the messages that flow between applications use a record and playback feature. Where testers would usually employ development teams to develop test stubs and harnesses to deliver end-to-end integration testing, which once developed then require support and maintenance. Testers can now replace that with tooling that virtually delivers integrations, quickly producing production-like end-to-end environments in which to test. Okay, so test automation in SAFe or in Scaled Agile. The move to SAFe requires both a cultural and a mindset change. SAFe cannot be implemented without buy-in throughout the organization, most importantly, requiring full business support. The move to SAFe is not a big bang approach, but supported by the SAFe implementation roadmap that builds towards the continuous delivery pipeline that supports release on demand. So from this, we've discussed waterfall and its limitations, to this, the continuous delivery pipeline. This supports the Agile release train, which in turn leads to release on demand, supported by SAFe methodologies such as DevOps. The three elements of the continuous delivery pipeline include continuous exploration, which focuses on creating alignment on what needs to be built. In continuous exploration, design thinking is used to ensure the enterprise understands the problem or the customer may need a solution for. And it starts with an idea to provide value to customers, which are then analysed and further researched, leading to understanding of what is required. Continuous integration focuses on taking features from the program backlog and implementing them. In continuous integration, the application of design thinking focuses on refinement of features. And then finally, continuous deployment, which takes the change from the staging environment and deploys them to production. At the point they're verified and monitored to make sure they are working properly. This step makes the features available in production, and the business determines the appropriate time to release them to the customers. So we've already described Agile Scrum and built-in quality to support greater agility. And here is a DevOps model. DevOps describes the link between development and operations. It ensures collaboration from idea to decommission. So again, it is fully supported by built-in quality. You can also see that the DevOps model is supported by tooling and automation throughout that delivery methodology and lifecycle. So if we look here, we look at continuous testing. We've already looked at the testing tools. So we support build and test in this particular area, and obviously the sprints that support that. So here, Jira is mentioned to support, here Zephyr is mentioned as the test repository. SOAP UI is used to support automated SOA testing, and Selenium supports functional testing with JUnit to support unit testing. In the continuous development area, which supports planning and code, Jira is mentioned to support the delivery planning and task allocation, and Bitbucket as a code repository, which allows collaboration and management of that code. In the continuous deployment area, which supports deploy and operate, Chef and Puppet are mentioned to support automated application configuration. Continuous monitoring is supported, as you can see, by Splunk and other tools. And then finally, in the continuous integration area, which supports release, Jenkins is mentioned to support that process and the continuous integration. A combination of these tools and a change to mindset and culture enables release on demand. So our journey. We place quality at the center of delivery to provide consistent test delivery, reusable test assets, and measurement and metrics. We then select the appropriate test tooling, a test repository as our book of records, appropriate automation candidates reduce cost, time, and improve quality, automation frameworks, simplify automation and test case maintenance, and then finally, service virtualization supports complex environments and replaces testing stubs and harnesses. So we then need to change the culture and mindset to built-in quality, effectively shift left and right, but in the scaled agile world, built-in quality. And that ensures quality is delivered across the whole application lifecycle, from idea to decommission. My name's Jason Taylor. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, this webinar, and I'm going to hand now back to Adam.
That's great, Jason. Thanks very much for that, and thanks for that kind of useful walkthrough. We've got a little bit of time for questions in here. So, Jason, one question we've had come in is, what's the classic thing you see go wrong when people try and move to an automated testing? So, what's the kind of main thing people should be looking out for?
Well, actually, thank you for that, Adam, and thank you for that question. It feeds into the insight piece that I was talking about that you can find on the P2 website. The biggest issue we find is what we call automation becoming shelfware. And that is because when automation is built and managed by automation-only specialists that have scripted in the native language of that particular tool, rather than using a framework approach, we may well find that it works perfectly the first time it's used as an automation scripting, but changes may have been made to the application between the first time it's used and then when it's used again, especially in those shift right type, in the shift right that we were talking about earlier. And automation then becomes shelfware because it's difficult to maintain those scripts if they've not been well notated. And also, generally, you may need to find the person that's written your scripts originally in order to maintain them so that they work again. So the framework approach deals with that. And as I say, there's an insight piece that goes into a lot more detail.
Wonderful. And that's available on our website, isn't it?
that's available on the P2 website in the testing area.
Wonderful. A very quick question we had come in. Would you mind going back to the previous slide and just going through that last point again?
1 second, let me do that. The change the culture and mindset.
Please, yes.
Yeah, so again, per the previous slide, SAFE talks about the culture and mindset being changed across the whole organization, and it's got to have that level of business buy-in. So we can see here, we talk about quality being built in, and that means from idea, and that can be generated, obviously, you know, that's generally generated by the business, as we talked about in the customer-centric agile model earlier. And then from that idea that's considered at business level, all the way through the application lifecycle, and not just through the build and the test and the deploy and the release into an organization, all the way until decommission. So we changed the culture and mindset that says, firstly, we build in quality, we design quality in, we run that as real quality assurance, which is shift left, which is let's test all the way through our delivery, all the way through to the very extremes of shift right, which is when we decommission an application at the end of its life cycle.
Great stuff, thank you. And we've probably got time for one final question here. Would you mind expanding a bit about what service virtualization tools might be available, and how do you build a service virtualization?
Yes, so a number of the, so I know that, and I've been exposed to these tools previously. Most of the larger software delivery organizations now do have service virtualization. So I started looking at this at Hewlett Packard before that changed to Micro Focus, and I know they've kept a service virtualization tool available. And CA most definitely deliver service virtualization tools as well. Sorry, those are the organizations. I forgot the second part of the question, Adam.
It's how do you build service virtualization? What would you say are the first couple of steps you need to go through?
Well, the first proper steps are definitely working with organizations like CA and Micro Focus to select the right tools for your application and your organization. And those organizations will certainly support your teams in the creation. Certainly, when I've used them first time round, you work with organizations like CA to create those service virtualizations, understand the record and playback features and those messages that you want to create within the tooling instead of using stuffs and harnesses. So really two things. One, work with the right supplier, which is what we talked about in this particular webinar. Select the right tool, and then that supplier, in my experience, will definitely support you through the initial uses as those tools. I mean, you know, you can use the suppliers, you know, full time to support the tools, or, you know, take that knowledge, do that training, and then obviously use those tools within your own organization.
Brilliant. Well, look, Jason, that's been great. Thank you so much. I think we're just about out of time. So if you wouldn't mind just jumping to that last slide. Obviously, do feel free to contact both Jason and myself, or on LinkedIn, or you can come straight through to emails. We've had a few questions we couldn't answer in the time, but we will definitely get back to you on that. So please do send them in. And really, it all just remains for me to say, you know, please do join us at the next 2 webinars. In 2 weeks' time, we've got one which will be driven by myself, looking at the future of project management. So we're looking at some of the trends and some of the changing activities that are going to make up project management over the next 5 and 10 years. And then after that, we'll be doing a deep dive into change management, stakeholder management. How do you really get people to buy into your change and pull that change from you rather than having it pushed onto you? So 2 really interesting webinars that I think you'll get a lot out of. So listen, thanks for joining us, and please do join us again. And apart from that, do have a wonderful weekend. All the best.
Thank you.